Om Vedanta Siddhanta Niruktiresha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagadcha Akanda Rupa Stite Reva Boksho Brahmadvitiye Shrutayaha Pramanam. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Is the apt and final conclusion of Vedanta that all is Brahman. Time, space, living beings and the world. Living in constant recognition of this fact is what is called enlightenment. Brahman is pure and perfect, and one without a second. And the revealed scriptures are the sure and certain proof of this fact. Om, peace, peace, peace. May that Brahman protect us. May that Brahman sustain us. May that Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. We are entering into the third class in a series that is all about these 40 verses in the Avadhuta Gita. Its third chapter, verse 3 on till the end of the third chapter. You have these wonderful verses, slokas they're called in Sanskrit, that end with that beautiful refrain that I am like the sky. And we've taken and even chanted 6 or 7 of those verses in the last 2 classes. And we've been showing with charts that are pertinent to the subject. We've been showing how the Avadhut explains non-duality in his own unique way. There are many interpretations of that one indivisible Brahman that is agreeably to all of them, beyond the senses, unchanging, and all-pervasive, eternal, but particularly without origin. And that may be a fact that was brought out and into light more readily and available by Gaudapada around 600 AD, that beings were talking about Brahman in all the right ways. That is, the luminaries, the rishis, certainly were. And probably seers of other religions also were coming to know, like say Meister Eckhart, that of the oneness between the apparently individualized soul and what we call Brahman in our tradition, or God, or the Almighty Spirit, Almighty Father. So in that way, we found seers also in other religions saying that the eye that sees everything is the same eye that sees God, is the same eye that's in man, and would make other non-dual statements that sometimes frightened the orthodoxy a bit. And that's always the case with beings who are following of a more conventional run of religion. Sometimes that can even descend into what Vivekananda called irreligion. And the superstitions of that can begin to mount, which is why we've pointed now 2 or 3 times to this chart with its Frankensteinian philosophy that I'm joking about a lot. It's not for the sake of argument that we're talking about Advaita Vedanta. There's no argument in Gaudapada and those who've realized non-duality, but they have compassion for people who aren't able to hear the facts of non-duality, because it is its own stratum of higher philosophy. It's hard to find a word for it. Religion and philosophy don't really work in that way. But still, it needs to be spoken as the Avadhut is doing here in his 30 verses, calling it indivisible like the sky, and transcendent and bliss-filled, like open, like all of space. And he's equating that to himself, not just out there, but inside, inner space, and also transcendent space. beyond the three phases of mind, like waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, which is a famous and favorite teaching in Advaita Vedanta, that the mind is having this big mass collective mental dream through these three states of waking, dreaming, deep sleep. So if they've examined these three states and told you that that's your mind's business and that you're not the mind, then you're beginning to ask, well, then who am I? The famous refrain in non-dual philosophy. And so there's one of these facts that we can use even nowadays in terms of words like indivisible, all-pervasive, indestructible, eternal, infinite. One's called non-origination. So that's a word that hasn't been brought up very often. And I'd say that it might just be one of the two main pillars of non-duality. Ajati is the word, so unborn. If you accept it right away, death is an illusion. If you accept it, any other life than eternal life is not acceptable. And it puts to rest all sorts of age-old doubts. And a being like Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, who came to us recently in the 1800s with his great disciple Swami Vivekananda, they're living in that state. And then it makes it very convincing that Advaita Vedanta is not arguing when it presents its precepts and its concepts, probably beyond concepts, its axioms, its principles would be better words. But it's actually doing it out of great compassion so that people will not think in old, outdated, outmoded, tired ways about divine reality and their connection with it. It begins to remove the line of demarcation between matter and spirit, as Shankara says, between creature and creator, and between God and mankind. Those begin to become disappear. A simple way of saying that is draw a line on water, look for a second like there's two. So this is what Maya does, or what the human mind in Maya does. It's always drawing twos, and then so I think I'll make another division, another division, another division. My ego will make some more divisions there, and my intellect will make others. And pretty soon it's just all divided. But you forgot one of those words, undivided, that they keep concentrating on and telling you about, like non-origination. And so then pretty soon that line drawn on water disappears, and you're wondering what happened to the two-ness, which basically is what the seers are saying. I was in deep meditation. All of a sudden, I couldn't tell any difference between myself and what I was meditating on. And I realized that for years, decades, maybe lifetimes, I had been meditating on the Lord, the Mother, God, Brahman, Allah, Buddha nature, however you want to call it, as being something that I needed to somehow attain in the future, like some post-mortem emancipation. And my teacher used to say, I don't believe in a post-mortem emancipation. I believe in Jivan Mukta, Jivan Mukti, and the one who's attained it, a Jivan Mukta. That's an ever-liberated state, a state that's always at hand. And when you sit in meditation and put it somewhere, outwards or inwards, then you begin to divide it subtly. Just jumping ahead here, we'll get to it maybe weeks later in this class series if we get that far. But here's the second to the last verse of what the Avadhut says about this kind of meditation. There is no separate space inside or out in your Atman. So how can there be a place to meditate or a meditator striving to go within? No form can be where no space exists. So who is it that you are trying so hard to see in meditation? That samadhi is just your true nature, for you are pure existence, pure wisdom, pure bliss, as boundless as the sky and infinite like space. Jnanamritam samarasam gagano pamoham is the refrain over and over again. At the end of each one of these 40 verses the Avadhut gives us, he wants to hammer that into us, that he can talk about Brahman as we said earlier, oh, is it clouded or is it unclouded? Is it at the root or does it have no roots? Is it gross or is it subtle? If you remember back 2 weeks, the last 2 Sundays, these are the things he's bringing up. And every time he considers that, he brings forth one of these subtle dualities, he immediately knocks it down with this final refrain. I am the nectar of non-dual wisdom itself. In other words, in this verse, I am the one meditating, the one meditated upon, and the act of meditation. Those three of all are all within me. There's no divisions anywhere. That's what Advaita Vedanta stands on, the premise it stands on. If that's the main premise that all these pillars of Advaita Vedanta stands on, these words we're talking about, then Ajativata has got to be one of the most important, because people are still laboring under an idea that God shot out a bolt of lightning from somewhere and created something out of nothing. And all of a sudden, this something stood up upright, like it was knit together, like Frankenstein was, by different body parts from different areas. So now it's a conglomeration of various forces, you see. But the Upanishads come back again and again and say that the Atman, the true self of man, is not matter, and it's not energy, zap, and it's not thought either. Like he's all of a sudden conceiving, I think I will make man. Here I'll use energy to do it. Oh, there's matter out of nothing. So this is a Frankensteinian philosophy that we want to replace, let's say now. It's a kind of false Zen mutation, you say. This is an imputation that you're using. So these are false imputations that some religions are using to try and make something out of nothing or nothing out of something. And either way, the Avadhut is going to look at that askance with eyebrows raised and say, do you know what you're saying to me? And do you know who I am? It's like Vivekananda said, I'm a Vedantist. I hardly see any other God anywhere except myself. Probably said hardly because Sri Ramakrishna was his guru. So he definitely saw God in that great soul. So warming us up to this topic of non-duality again, and reminding us where we are in it, is this word ajati. If you put it in the original word jati, then that means a birth in a caste or in a creed, in a race. You see, you were born. So ajati means oops. That was a false assumption. That was a false imputation. You see, you were never born. You're unborn, in fact. So we started out the first class thinking about the word acreate, which is how Vivekananda coined a word here when he came and saw us laboring under this monstrous philosophy that was proposing that there was a God somewhere outside of ourselves, like floating up in heaven on a cloud, and that we had to look up to find it, that him, usually him would be it. And so we're basically putting it in space. We're giving it a gender, and it becomes just pretty much a projection of our own mind as we like to see it. And therefore, God is a concept. And that's not going to work for a non-dualist who sees all that as an attempt to make a separate I out of everything. Lord Vashisha said that a separate I maker is what the ego is. So when you come into this mind composite called a psychophysical being, sometimes it's called a body-mind mechanism. Those are two great phrases we use in Vedanta. And immediately there's a sense of self there called ego, ahamkara. It's the doer. It's I am doing, karma, ahamkara. So now it's all under my auspice, you see. And how long will it be before this storehouse of nature begins to dissatisfy me? We were talking about that yesterday at Godblog session, that Sri Ramakrishna said there's this owner of the land, he's got a storehouse. all the goods are in the storehouse. So there's a big feast coming up. He assigns an employee to go, one of his employees to go and watch the storehouse so that no nonsense happens with it. And the employee is feeding people out of the storehouse and carrying on with this feast. But as soon as the feast is over, the employee walks away, his job's done. And so he's done with the storehouse. And so the owner runs there really quick and locks it up, you see. So no nonsense will happen, no theft. So the whole thing is what in Sri Ramakrishna's life was. He saw this happening at the temple grounds, and he thought how amazing that being, that employee that's assigned to the storehouse is the body-mind mechanism, or the ego of the individual. And that he's got a storehouse that he's in charge of all of a sudden. Oh, that's the ego and everything it loves, i.e. nature, i.e. objects, i.e. enjoyment of objects, i.e. ownership of those objects that you are enjoying. So immediately the ego is coming on in force with all of these false imputations about it. And it uses it for the whole feast. That means all of life. It feasts on nature his whole life. And then at the end he says, wow, I'm getting old, I can't enjoy these things anymore. I can't taste well, I don't see well, I can't hear well. None of these things are giving me any satisfaction anymore. I think I'll leave. And so he departs the body and leaves the storehouse. And that's when the Lord comes and takes his place. See? Now the great storehouse of nature falls back into the hands of the great owner. That is the Lord of the universe. And he locks it up. So the soul won't come back to it. So the soul can be free of nature. So very beautiful stories we're examining on weekends that you can join us with, and find out very simple analogies for these great truths, which sometimes can be rather abstruse. But I don't think there's anything unclear about the word unborn or acreate, when you apply it to the soul of mankind, called Atman. And we've used that word twice now in the last few minutes. And so that's what doesn't get created, like, say, a body-mind mechanism gets created, as it were. Even there, we looked last week to find out that even things are unoriginated, not just the soul. So we have to step forward and say, I beg your pardon, I was never created. Why are you putting that role on me? I'm a create. I am the Lord. I and my Father are one. How come you're calling me different from Father or Mother or reality? And how come all of a sudden I'm born out of nothing? This is an insult to my intelligence, you see, philosophically and intellectually speaking. So that can't be accepted. Number two, I'm beginning to doubt that anything that came into being has an origin either. In other words, you're saying God created the universes of name and form, time and space, but all the Indian rishis that I've studied and heard about are saying that all those things are unoriginated too. You can't create something out of nothing. So the nothing is, where is that nothing? The void? Well, nature abhors a void. It loves a plenum. And so there must be plenty in nature in an unmanifested way called seeds, just like there was nothing out here a couple hundred years ago. All of a sudden there's a tree growing out the window. It didn't take it long for a seed to produce a huge tree. So that tree was nothing before, except for its seed, you see. So this is how you can't get something out of nothing. Even if it were true that God can somehow create a soul or create the things in nature that the soul wants to enjoy, those things would have to come out of something. And so if the Lord thinks, as it were, if we can make that imputation on the Lord, make it a matter of thinking, then it must be the Lord's mind that's doing that thinking. Just like I can stop thinking if I want to, and you should be able to too. It's called meditation. So just stop thinking and sit, see. And pretty soon the light comes to you, the sound of Om occurs to you, as we were talking about yesterday again in our sessions. And then you say, I don't see any difference between that light and that sound in myself. And in fact, first I thought I was coming out of it. Now I realize it's coming out of me, you see. And this is exactly what the Avadhuta is trying to explain to us now, and which we've been going on and on about for 3 Sundays, almost 3 Sundays now, is that all of this has come out of the mind. And the mind has 3 divisions, or 3 levels: waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. It's the simplest way this idea of projection has ever been put in philosophy, because it's been said a lot. There's no creation, but there's a projection going on. Creation doesn't make sense because you can't get something out of nothing. I don't know how much we have to explain that by just saying those words, but you can project something out of the mind, and you can do that a lot. It's called dreaming, basically. It's also called fantasizing. It's also called conceptualizing. It's also called invention. But it's a kind of dream that the soul's engaging in. Funny that all its inventions, its creations, its conceptions get forgotten in deep sleep. Funnier still, in a sobering way, that all of these imaginations, fantasies, and all that also go away at death. And the ego can't put its name on it when it leaves. You can't take it with you, kind of style of thinking. So in this way, we are focusing around this great word called ajati, and the path, vada, that those who walk it, the ajati vadans, they walk this path of knowing that they are the Lord in human form, and nothing can take that away from them. No other philosophy can compete with that, and it can't attract them, because they're not bound, earthbound anymore, and their minds are not enslaved anymore by objects, attachments, and desires. Those 3 are coming forth again and again in the studies. You find out that there's these desires, and that's kind of the root of the problem. And then these desires turn into attachments. These attachments turn into obsessions. And it's the same with material goods, and it's also the same with philosophies. They find a place that's comfortable for them to perch, and they'll stay there in fundamentalism, or in irreligion, or in dualism. And all the while, this beautiful truth of non-duality does not get expressed. So, not an argumentation that we're standing up here presenting. It's a matter of grace and a matter of fact that if one considers this plateau, highest plateau, the Advaita Vedanta, the greatest philosophy that mankind ever knew, quote unquote, Swami Vivekananda, if this gets brought back now, and we feel it's being brought back by the grace of the Divine Mother, who is now showing herself more and more to people, then all these worries, these fears, these doubts, these problems, these sufferings, and this dark ignorance goes away in a thrice. Funny, in a thrice, because waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, you wake up from all of those. That's called yogic insomnia, also called enlightenment. I just chanted about it. Knowing, being constantly in mind, keeping constantly in mind that this Brahman is everything, that's called enlightenment. So we don't have to ask the question anymore to each other or put it on the front of a magazine. What is enlightenment? It's remaining in constant recognition of the fact that all this is Brahman. All this means you as well. Don't leave that out of the quotient, and don't meditate it away, as we were just saying. Make sure that you're actually engaged in meditating upon the one who is beyond meditation. That's from the Darshana Upanishad, said by Dattatreya. Right? Lately, I've been studying the Darshana Upanishad. So I found out Dattatreya saying that to Samkriti, this great student, is saying, go on meditating after you connect everything, like the AUM of Om, or the 5 elements into the mind. After you make all these connections, then go on meditating on the one who's beyond meditation. And that's what woke Samkriti up to Dattatreya's teaching, so that he joined the territories of the enlightened beings. So we stopped off with this chart, and we had sung a couple verses which we were explaining. So let's go on and sing 7 and 8. We're chanting this together if you want, because you know the last refrain. I've sat with some of you and sang this live and taught you how to sing it in the past at our ashrams. So we've done this before, so sing along if you hear it. But let's go ahead and add a few more verses onto our study list that still are pressing on with these great, I can only call them almost transcendent or formless dualities, if the phrase makes sense. And coming back and using this root of everything called a jati, the unborn soul, or the soul that cannot be created because it is doing. It is the ground for all of everything that's being projected by the mind. So Avadhut goes on singing then in verse 7 and 8. Samvili sarva karanani naboni bani. Samvidi sarva vishayan chanabo vibhascha. Samvidi chaikam amalam nahi bandha muktam. Jnanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. Nirbodha bodha gahano nabamami tata. Durlaksha laksha gahano nabamami tata. Asana rupa gahano nabhavami tata. Jnanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. Jnanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. Jnanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. So he sings, and I'll give you two different English translations of this. So verse 7 and 8. And this is from two different editions of Avadhuta Gita by two different swamis of the Ramakrishna order. The Ramakrishna order has been putting out these beautiful non-dual scriptures for people in this age and rendering them into beautiful English, but also many other languages. So it's one of the ways in which Mother gets this special favorite philosophy of hers, if you want to call it that, around into human ears and hearts and minds, awakens them. And so they have to be put, I think in Sanskrit, communicates the original vibration of the rishis' thinking. And then your language, you should be able to put it in the kind of vernacular that you can relate to, like, say, our founder, Lex Hickson, was so good at doing here in SRV. So the 7th verse there, he's singing about senses and sense organs are like banks of fog hanging in multiple valleys. Such obfuscations cannot dull the sheen of the all-radiant Brahman. Words such as freedom and bondage cannot be utilized to speak about that Brahman. I only know that I am pure existence, wisdom and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. And Sloka 8. And I think here he changes the tone from the strictly non-dual to the personal. And as if he's talking to one of his students, like Dattatreya is talking to Samkriti in the Darshana Upanishad, and because the student by this time is going, I'll never know what the master knows. This is like impossible. Like, I can't understand this. It's not coming through to me, because he's contradicting. He's putting form these opposites in front of me, like two black rocks, smashing them together to nothing, and I have nothing to grab onto. So he goes on in a little bit more personal vein. He says, "Oh, precious one, do not imagine that I am imperceptible, nor am I inaccessible to your perception. It is not that I am near, nor impossible to perceive, that is, like far away. Most certainly, I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky and infinite like space." So this word that comes to me then is immanence. It's like consciousness is immanent. It's immediate. And so therefore, all one needs to do is think about it and speak it, and it's there. And even though the mind can't conceive of it and the words can't express it, you still need to engage in those two, mind and thought and speech, so that these will remind the mind of its deep connection, because the mind has never heard anything like this before. When it got into embodiment, it was looking at the seeds of nature and saying, I covet those, I want those. I'm going to go down and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to accomplish this, I'm going to accomplish that. And I'm going to project that, and then I'll come to own it. It'll be my possession, and I'll enjoy it to the nth degree. And it goes down, and it finds that this was supposed to be sweet candy, and instead it left a bitter taste in the mouth, quoting one song that Krishna used to sing, that the mother sent me there, and go and enjoy all that. You see, like that storehouse of nature, go and enjoy all that. So it tried to do that, but it found out that all these senses or sense organs were like fogs of cloud. It was trying to enjoy clouds of fog, and sort of like in a haze. The mind was in a haze. And where was the enjoyment, and how long did it last? And even worse than that, did enjoyment just give way to a cycle of suffering and pain, which is famous, this world is famous for the cycle of birth and death, the cycle of joy and suffering, and of good and bad, the change of good and bad. One of iron, one of gold, Vivekananda says. So these are some of these verses. That was 7 and 8. So now, since 2 weeks ago, we've sung and chanted together, and you can go back and look at these. And also, I have a new recording of this on a CD. Sorry, old style here, but we can probably upload it to SRVN so that people can get it. But the whole stotram has now been recorded, and with words and everything, you can get a copy and sing it to yourself every day or once a week. Try. And let the Avadhut remind you of your true identity and of your true affiliation with Brahman, and help you detach from things unreal, changing, and from this idea of being a being that has created somewhere out of nothing at some particular point of time, when it's timeless, when you are timeless. Might as well go on saying, I'm timeless, spaceless, and causeless. Get that in there. I'm pure existence, equanimity, and ecstasy. Or you could say, I am boundless like the sky, infinite like space. And it's as if he's saying those same things. Satchidananda I am. I am that Brahman. There can be no other. I'm quoting Vivekananda now in his Song of the Sannyasin. So, having sung 2 more verses, we've added 7 and 8 to our collection of verses. Let's study them some, which is what you do when you've been put in mind and put in possession of a great non-dual philosophy like this, you want to go on and develop it. We were in the process of doing that when we were going down these lists, and I think in 2.5 classes or so now, we've taken the left list, right, and we've taken the right list, I think, not all of it, and then we were in the middle of the middle list because we had come to this fact that once I realized, and it must be true because I feel it in my heart, that I am one with God. And even if I feel otherwise, that's just a feeling. See, if people try and convince me otherwise, shame on them. They should be like Vivekananda, who would walk up to you and say, don't you realize that you're God walking around on 2 legs? So if you heard something like that, it would probably snap you out of your bad mood. You'd get some prasad. You'd get these sets of 4 good moods that you should go out of the house with every day. I should probably bring that chart and show it to you. But you can find it in Footfalls of the Indian rishis, that there are 4 moods, and samprasad is one of those. So these moods should be upon you all the time when you gad about the world here, in the 5 elements, the realm of the 5 elements, and where senses and sense objects are become like fogs to you, you see, in a valley. But even that fog cannot obfuscate the reality of Brahman that's behind it, lying behind it. I was changing a tire on a freeway once. Cars whipping by early in the morning, and the sun wasn't out yet. And then down below, next to I-5, one of these freeways, there's a little valley. So I went on changing the tire. Minutes went by, all foggy down there. And as I began to look, all of a sudden the sun came up and it started to burn off the clouds down there in the valley. And pretty soon I could see all the greenery and the trees and the little lake and all of those things that were down there next to the road. And it just was a matter of minutes for that to happen. So metaphorically speaking, if you concentrate while you're doing the changing of tires in your everyday life, on the road of life, you want to take it further, and make sure you look to the side and watch when the sun comes out, and watch these false imputations, these false superimpositions burn away in the light of your own consciousness. Because the sun is just doing its natural job, you see, burning away things. That's what he says here then. He pretty soon, and I'll give you a little peek at next week, which you got to be on hand for that. I am the fire of living intelligence that consumes the activities of the actionless Atman. I am the fire of non-dual wisdom that removes the sorrows of the sorrowless Atman. So by this time, yes, you can have a lot of compassion for a student that's sitting there. That doesn't make sense, you see. You're throwing a lot of contradictions at me, but when I think about them, I see that it's the only way to get beyond good and bad, pleasure and pain, virtue and vice, life and death, because I either brood on one or I brood on the other. If I'm bad, then I'm brooding, I wish I was good. If I'm good, I'm wishing, I'm afraid of bad. You see, I'm going to become bad, you see. So this is this loop of dvandva mohena, dualities that bind the mind into these loops of thinking, you see, that are never ending. They're cyclic, things you want to break those bonds. Ramakrishna was the breaker of all bonds, snapper of the chains of bondage. It's a beautiful song. They sing that every day for decades since he was living. They've been singing this, "O thou snapper of the bondage of human birth," this beautiful song. And hundreds and thousands are singing that, you see. So you don't think that people who have this eye on the highest reaches of religion and philosophy, that they won't make a difference to the fog of Maya that's hanging over this world. They're the sun, and they're going to burn through all of that soon enough. The quicker for you, the better. So join them, and then you'll come to know what he's talking about here when he says, These obfuscations cannot dull the sheen of the all-radiant Atman. That's that sun, as it were. They can cover all they want, but they can't dull or take away or destroy, because indestructible is one of the words we'll want to use for Brahman. Akshara. There's a chapter in the Gita, Akshara Brahman, where Krishna goes on talking about that. And he's already shown Arjuna on the battlefield that spear can't cleave his true self, fire can't burn his true self, arrows can't pierce his true self, water can't drown his true self, an elephant cannot step on his true self. Look out, because that self is eternal and unborn and indestructible. And so if it was indestructible, it means it never got created. It was uncreatable too. So you use these higher dualities to prove to yourself the veracity and actuality of non-dual philosophy. So you can accept it without doubt and without fear, 100% acceptance. Or maybe like Sri Ramakrishna said, 120%. So this verse 7 then, he ends with words such as freedom and bondage cannot be utilized to speak about that. So that with a capital T, tat in Sanskrit, is a very powerful word, bijam, loaded with all the implications of non-duality. It's one of the amazing ways in which you can actually designate Brahman. Oh, you mean that? You're talking with someone, and you're talking all sorts of relativity up and down the stairs of philosophy, lowest rung, middle steps, higher stairs. And all of a sudden you say something that penetrates through all that, and your friend says, oh, that? Why didn't you tell me you were talking about that? Oh, that highest Brahman, that nameless, formless, timeless, spaceless, deathless, birthless Atman. Why didn't you say that? I just said that. So did you. So that's with a capital T. Even Sanskrit, it's the same. Tat, Om, Tat, Sat. Om, everything that's in the word. Tat, that Brahman is, and it is the truth. Sat, Om, Tat, Sat. So 3 words can break the camel's back there. Bring the house of cards of Maya tumbling down around the ears of all and sundry. That expression was first uttered by Ram way back in the earlier yugas. Bring everything crashing down around the ears of all and sundry. So that house of Maya cannot exist. That cloud castle in the sky of your mind cannot exist for nearly as long as this timeless Brahman that these seers are going on and on singing about. And when they sing, they chant. And when they chant, they revere. And this reverence is a kind of worship that happens even at the non-dual level. And so you can't take that away from them. See, it doesn't have a form anymore. Why are you singing to it? You don't know the formless the way I know the formless. That it's beyond both form and formlessness. And he has a verse about that too. Let's look to prove further in this middle column here so that we really get the gist of what the non-dualists are trying to tell us with these great words, indestructible, and particularly now, birthless and deathless. But I think better than birthless to deathless is non-originated. Because if you say birthless and deathless, it brings back centuries, millennium of people believing that they are born and believing that they die, when the soul has never done that, because it is a create. So they begin to think that way, so the mind goes opposite of the direction of Atman. So it begins to fall into the sevenfold road of ruination, you see. So it needs to come back to that place where it first conceived of a start that it made, and reverse its thinking, and stop its thinking, and open its third eye and see once and for all that that's the truth that it should never have wandered away from in its mind. It was the mind's doing, a fourfold mind that was at the foundation of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, and that you wandered into. The soul wandered into it as a separate entity. Think I'll go play in the fields of the Lord kind of thing. Fine if you remember the Lord, but if you wake, dream, and go into deep sleep without any recognition of who you are, then how is that going to be possible? So these words are important, and right now Gaudapada and Shankara are going on and on about how ajati is one of those foundational words. I'm not sure where we left off with last time, but since we are talking about the three states of awareness, let's take this one here that's actually number 2. By engaging in waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, the mind produces worlds and objects that are insubstantial. So it's like going into a carnival and you're hungry, so you see the man making cotton candy. Give me one of those. See, so that's a dream you're having. See, basically this tastes good, but it's insubstantial, right? It's not going to satisfy your hunger, and it's probably not that good for you. It's just sugar on your tongue, gone as quick as that. Sri Ramakrishna said, when a sweetmeat goes down the throat, you can't even remember what it tasted like a few seconds later. What was that again? That's how fleeting as these dualities are. They're like fog banks in multiple valleys, right? These are sense objects you're enjoying, and you're going on enjoying them, but they're just projections of their mind. They have no real substance. The only thing that actually gives them any substance is that the mind is calling this all up based in the Atman. So we're not a nihilistic or we don't believe in a void. We know that there's the foundation. If you don't want to call it self, fine with us. Call it pure existence, pure knowledge, and pure bliss, and try and convince us that it's not. But first go and experience before you try and convince us. Because we've got hundreds and hundreds of great souls in India that are concurring on the existence of the self. Call it whatever you want. Pragyaparam, that's how Buddha called it. Don't think Buddha believed in God, then why did he call it Pragyaparam? Supreme consciousness, supreme wisdom. This is how Vivekananda sussed out Lord Buddha's deep faith in reality, in Buddha nature, if you want. So this is how the father of non-duality is saying, well, remember when you're waking and dreaming and in deep sleep, that all the things you're experiencing there are just phantoms called up out of your mind, and the Atman's watching. See? They used to say big brother's watching. They meant the government back in the 60s, big brother's watching. But now we can say philosophically, today, the Great Mother is watching. And so all this waking, dreaming, and deep sleep activity that's going on is for her. As he was saying, look like a little kid saying, look at me, Ma, look what I can do. Who's the best dreamer, Well, we think Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa probably is a good pick for that. And it's because he awakened from all dreams. Gaudapada also says here, all creatures exist only in the mind and are seen only by the mind. They are not seen apart from the mind. That cannot be denied because you didn't know what happened to you in deep sleep. You didn't know where that coveted ego that you called yourself by different names, whether it was Harry or Hari, you called yourself by different names. That particular ego that you named went away last night. Where did it go? And how did it come dancing back? And why is it sometimes inflated and sometimes deflated? Why is it sometimes happy and other times sorry? Is that really me? So I'm beginning to doubt that creature. You know, like you would doubt the color of a chameleon in the woods, because every time you went in there, it changed colors during the different times of the day. I don't know what that consists of. It's changing all the time. But I'm becoming aware that there's an unchanging substrating underneath it. Like when it sits on the tree, it turns brown. When it sits on a leaf, it turns green. Wow, you know, maybe it's the underlying substratum that's the persistent thing here. I've been looking and thinking and brooding upon the wrong thing. Things in nature, like you're saying, clouds in valleys. I should be taking my mind off those and looking towards the sun, whose power burns away all these obfuscations, all these coverings, all these insinuations, all these conditionings. So that's a beauty, isn't it? The creatures exist only in the mind, they're seen only by the mind, and they're not seen apart from the mind. The last part of that is toward the heart of non-duality. What about not seeing them? Because you're not going to be convinced very much that you're telling me all this appearing in my mind. I don't know if I can go that far to accept it. Well, how about this? They're not seen apart from your mind. And all of a sudden, anyone with any sense of truth in them, hey, he's right, you see. They're right, see. You don't, you know, anything that I am saying that I'm thinking is a part of my mind is like a man in a stump, stanu manusya, or a snake in a rope, Vedanta says. It was never there. It was a false imputation. And that also happened in my mind. So Maya happens in my mind. But when my mind's gone, I'm not in Maya anymore. It comes dancing back like green scum on a lake. Part it comes dancing back. Or we're talking about the Kami creeper, covers a lake. You walk up to the edge and grab a vine of it, pull it, the whole thing, all the way across the lake, moves towards you. And why is that? Because it's all interconnected underneath. It's this interdependent arising. Everything has a connection to underneath that hidden by the body of water, this net of connecting karma that people are experiencing in waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. Gone, back. It's gone, it's back, and it's gross. It's gone, it's back, and it's subtle. And then it's gone again. And it also is colored by my mind and particular gunas or moods that my mind is in when I see it, hour to hour, day to day, lifetime to lifetime. So sometimes to talk about non-duality, they'll use those tacks of the opposite. Here's one. Duality is mind vibration itself, wherein objects appear. Non-dual mind is not related to objects, so is unattached. Nobody's ever said, you know, in their right mind, pun intended, hey, look at that unoriginated, uncreated thing over there. I think I'll go get it. See what I mean? It'd be like chasing phantoms. Can't see them, you don't even know if they're real, but you're going after them. See? So, very nice. Non-dual mind is not related to objects, so it's unattached from them. Look at that non-object over there. I think I'll go enjoy it. No, it's not going to work. So he's calling this further as we work our way down the list. Mentally imagined phenomena. They do not exist in reality. Like the dream you had last night, for instance. This realization is free from fear, grief, and desire. That's a heady combination of three very unworthy and untrustworthy things. You see, fear, doubt, and desire, and grief. Those are the things that keep haunting the mind, that drive it away from accepting 100% this finest of all philosophies that ever existed, that's going to put you perfectly in line with your true nature. It'll take your hailstone and dissolve it in that ocean over there, once and for all. And once that's happened, you can reform your hailstone and look at the ocean from a distance and say, I'm from that. Other people unconsciously get their hailstones, like rainwater drops, dissolved in the ocean. When they're brought back out of the ocean, they can't see the ocean or accept it anymore because they didn't dissolve there. They're just being remanufactured, you see, into fog, lying in valleys. But the hailstone knows, as Shankara says, my mind, meditating on the boundless expanse of the ocean of Brahman and its nectar-like swell of the Atman that comes up, pure conscious awareness swelling out of the breast of Brahman. My mind got so attracted to that, it became like a hailstone, and it fell there, and it dissolved there. And I was put in eternal peace and ecstatic bliss. Doesn't it sound a little bit like the Avadhut here? I am pure existence, wisdom, and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. So they're using the best that nature has to offer because you're in it and you obviously believe in it. You just don't know yet that it's been produced by your mind. But once you come to know that you're not in nature, but nature is in you, that you were never born in nature, but nature has been born out of you, then you'll take command again. And this was the teaching of Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras. The seer has become obsessed with the seen. Now it thinks that it is the seen. So they go after things and they attach to them. When they attach to them, they become those things. Avadhut had an experience like that once when he saw the Brahmarakita, kind of a wasp-like insect, fall on the back of a cockroach, you see, and just freeze there. And he was sitting there in the forest, and everything was a lesson to him. So he sat there for days watching these two. They didn't move, the Brahmarakita and it's what it seized. And he would fall asleep against the tree, every once in a while, and then kind of wake up and, they're still there again. So I think so he finally saluted the Brahmarakita and said, you're my teacher of meditation. I've never seen anyone sit so long as you, attached to one thing. Like I should be attached to Brahman alone, see, and not to changing nature. I should be attached to the unoriginated, birthless, deathless, timeless, spaceless ocean of existence that is pure existence, pure knowledge, and pure bliss, without any alloys, without any superimpositions, without any competitors, without any pretenders to the throne. That taught. So he saluted the Brahmarakita and left, went on to take 23 other teachers in nature. But that was his meditation teacher, the Brahmarakita. What else do the great non-dualists have for us here that have come through the beautiful Sanskrit and worked their way into some very powerful English for us? He talked about mentally imagined phenomena, right? So everything's in the mind. The mind's doing this, call it what you want, imagination, fantasy, creation, invention, superimposition, projection. There are plenty of good words to describe this dream that the mind's having at 3 levels. And then always coming back at the end and say, there's something watching that. That's me watching that. That's me, the Atman. I'm watching it from a standpoint of pure existence, pure knowledge, and pure bliss that I am. And I'm seeing the machinations and the various prestidigitations of the mind and Maya emanating out, all of these worlds, all these creatures, and the ancestors, the gods, the insects like the Brahmarakita, and my own body included, and billions of minds that are going through waking, dreaming, and deep sleep back to waking all the time. So this is mentally imagined phenomena to him, and they get lost in it. But they get lost in something that doesn't really exist. You see, like any dream. You wake up, Gaudapada says, you were running a race, right? In a dream. And they were handing you water along the way, and you were breathing and perspiring. You got thirsty, they handed you water, and you maybe got a trophy at the end because you won, you see. But then you wake up in your bed and the whole dream had nothing. You had no trophy, you were still thirsty. You could still be perspiring too, just from the activity in the dream. But the whole thing was a figment of projection of your mind. That's how Gaudapada describes this sankalpa that's going on, this mass collective mental dream with billions of beings participating in it. So he goes on in that vein, but the original state of mind that has turned away from these projections is verily unmoving. Let's add another word into our Advaitic vocabulary then. See? It's steady, sthiti, it's sthanam, it's unmoving. It doesn't come and go, move from place to place. It doesn't need to because it's already everywhere. See? So I was walking once along a road, barbed wire fence, pine tree, sign. I looked at the sign, it says, no trespassing. And I thought to myself, well, too late. I'm already everywhere. Sign, barbed wire fence, none of that can keep me out. I'm already all of that on the other side of the fence. I don't need to trespass or not trespass, you see. I mean, as you see, you could use it as a one-sided stroke in your favor. Oh, see, I'm already everywhere because I know that, but I don't need to trespass or not trespass. I'm just pure conscious awareness, boundless as the sky, infinite like space. It comes down to that as the final conclusion for every experience you're having here, while the body-mind mechanism is having this dream. You're having this dream more and more consciously every day because you're thinking about this. That's really the point, or the sub-point, if there is one. So it's unmoving. It forever rests in the province of the enlightened. That's Gaudapada. It's his own way of saying enlightenment. They reach a province, like this great land, boundless land of pure conscious awareness. And there are 4 samadhis that get you there in Advaita Vedanta, in his way of thinking. So this is the province of the enlightened. Look in your footfall book and you'll see what he says about them. And make sure you qualify yourself to enter there. If there's a great steamship leaving the harbor once every 500 years with an avatar on it, you see, there's a story about Sri Ramakrishna, you see. He was a great steamship that can carry millions of people across the ocean. So told my students once about that there's a ship, leaving the harbor. It only leaves once every 500 years or so. And he said, where do I get a ticket for that? He told me. I want to be on that long before it sails. I want to have my cabin reserved, first class if possible. So that's what it reminds me of here. However, then in every sweet bit of non-dual philosophy comes this warning or caution. The mind's projections conceal the Lord. But he is easily uncovered by applying non-duality. So there's a threefold teaching there, right? Oops, there's covering. That's okay, it's not so hard to get rid of it. And how do I do it, right? by applying non-duality, by remembering that my soul is like unborn. But where do all the problems of life go when I only live eternally? Is how Christ was trying to talk to his disciples, his apostles, about eternal life. You're talking about the life you're living as a tax collector, your life you're living under the thumb of the Romans, under the Pharisees, and fallen religion and all of that. But you should know that you should live eternally. You should know that you live eternally. So his mention of eternal life is our non-duality, trying to introduce it in a Middle Eastern segment of the world, thousands of years after India has already concluded that this is the truth. So that's waking people up in the best of all ways, Sri Krishna says in the Gita. The last several slokas, those being who present this teaching of non-duality to my children, they're giving out the best of yogas, this jnana yoga that concentrates on Advaita. So let's not stop at, the thing got covered. I think I'll just walk away. See, because that would be an immature renunciation, right? But let's stay around here and see how easily we can rip away these veils. How? Let me tell you about non-duality, my son. Let me tell you about eternal life. Let me tell you about, although you're standing here thinking that you were born in a human body and that you'll somehow die in the next few decades, that you were never born and you never die. You're eternal. You're immortal. How can the mortal become immortal? How can the immortal become the mortal? See, it just, either way, it doesn't make sense to Gaudapada. If the immortal is immortal, that means birthless and deathless all the time. It can't all of a sudden become mortal. But the mind can project that it's immortal on itself. See, I'm immortal. And so that works its way into every philosophy. From Caesar backwards and forwards, all of a sudden you're a mortal. But the immortal can never become that. It always remains what it is, just like tiger cannot change its spots. The nature of a thing is one with the thing itself. See? So that cannot change, no matter how many false imputations or projections rise in the mind. It'll throw so many things up and down. Finally, the magic shows over, and you just say, "Play over. I'm out of here." Sri Ramakrishna got that out of watching a play at the Star Theater. Everyone's talking, gathering in their seats. Those who have tickets, all of a sudden the curtain opens, say, "Hush, hush," and all this fragmented consciousness in different words and different relations around the many hundred people in the Star Theater there, immediately hushed, immediately focused on the stage. He loved that. See? I'm sure he's probably thinking, I wish I could get them to do that in meditation. As if these seven worlds, as it were, are all some sort of huge play on a stage of the Atman. And when the curtain went up or down on them, then all of a sudden the Atman came forward. They went home. They came back to who they were, instead of like the king's sons playing like the princes, playing like there's something else. I'm a cop, I'm a robber, see, I'm a holy man, I'm a thief. All these roles are playing, all of a sudden gone. They go back to being the king's sons again. So that's the way non-dualists try and explain it to us. You're dreaming that you're the finite. Now you must awaken. You're the infinite. You're dreaming that you're mortal. Your true nature is immortal. You're dreaming that you're non-eternal, that you undergo change, but you're the eternal, which is changeless. And one of the best ways that we can talk about that is ajati. And also aparinama. There's another companion pillar to ajati, no birth, no death, which goes deeper with the word non-origination, which we're fleshing out right now with these verses. But there's another companion pillar sitting next to that you ought to look at, is that the next most important thing is that everything changes in the mind when it wakes, dreams, and goes into deep sleep. Those three that themselves are three major changes. And there are three gunas in each of those that are changing inside the change, you see. So if I realize there's an underlying substratum that has no change, that does not vibrate, that does not think or turn into an object or get obsessed with an object or turn into a kind of energy coming from on high, that is a kind of change or transformation too. It's transformationless. It doesn't go through changes. So if you put together I'm unoriginated with I'm changeless, what bit of ignorance or Maya can persist anymore in you? You open your arms, your two arms, and grasp onto those two pillars, then what form of ignorance can ever persist or exist in you ever again? And that's the power of Advaita, or non-duality. You don't think it needs to be talked about because you're just on this side of it and can't quite understand it. But once that is talked about and introduced in such a way that these great souls have a way of doing, that ignorance dies forever. And one morning you woke up and your ignorance is gone, utterly gone. Because nobody can conceal a blazing fire inside a cotton cloth. So this truth of non-duality is the blazing fire and the cotton cloth are these mental projections. They conceal the Lord, but they cannot blot it out. And it's not that easy to strip these coverings away and stand forth and said, and in a game of hide and seek, and say, home, I'm home, you see. Come home, coming home is the name. There is no self-confidence in those who move about believing in an illusory world of seeming differences. You can see them getting inflated, getting deflated, having success, losing success, gaining power and riches, losing them. Everyone from the kings to the politicians to the businessmen and so forth. While the devotees, the salt of the earth, who are inheriting the earth because they're meek in their approach to the Lord, they're humble, are always in mind of their oneness with that. Like the hailstone is in mind of the ocean's liquid mass, boundless. I am that. So that's one of the signs. Also, all things existing within and without are products of the mind's imagination. So this idea of sankalpa. Stopping the mind from vibrating then, as he says here, quit projecting the mind into a place where there's some God that's different from you and you want to get in union with it and then somehow be enlightened. Know that meditator, space of meditation, the act of meditation, and the one you're meditating upon are the same thing. They can never be divided. So there we'll put another beautiful word into the picture, indivisible. And the mind is playing with divisions all the time in waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. It's already convinced people that only one of those is true. I mean, people nowadays are so benighted, philosophically speaking. Even the intellectuals are very darkened in their thinking to think that the waking state is real. And then further, it's the only reality. We're not even going to give a thought towards dreaming. We'll let the psychologists worry about that, you see. But the psychologists are busy worrying about it from the standpoint of the body being real and the mind being a brain. So how far are they going to get? About as far as having experience in deep sleep. So it's going to take a great soul with a capacious mind to sit and meditate long enough, like Buddha did under the Bo tree for 49 days, and look at the deep sleep state until it finally sees dreaming and waking coming out of it. Oh, there's where thought came from. When it started vibrating, that's the second stage of the word. Then when it turned into dreams, there's the third stage of the word. You know the word, right? And then it turned into the fourth state where everything got solid, and that's waking state. Oh, there's the Vaikari stage. And that's real only. So everything that got it there, forgotten, overlooked, escaped from. But what you should be escaping from was this world of 5 elements, as if those were real. And you didn't wake up to that when you saw that all the objects were consisting of vibrating particles, some of them that change at a billionth of a second. Is that the changeless Brahman you're after? Is that the self? It doesn't go through stages or dreams or imaginations or projections. So you've got a lot of deeper consideration to go through. Now, it's nice that we finished up most of this. We can refer to some of it next week. So I don't know if we've read it here, but since we are here, we could take this final quote at the bottom. Creation is duality. Advaita is non-duality. Before creation, no difference between the embodied soul and Brahman ever existed. Difference only pertains to a state yet to come. To regard such a state as being true is irrational. So say beings like Gaudapada and Shankara. It doesn't follow to them that you would end up with a conclusion like that, that moksha, enlightenment, is somewhere off in the future when time itself is a projection in your mind. So you're going to say to yourself, I'll realize that somewhere in time. You mean somewhere in your mind that projects the illusion of time? You're going to realize it in there? What kind of a realization is that going to turn into? You can't get to the infinite through the finite. So you must take this finite and dissolve it back in to the mind that's dreaming in 3 ways. It's a mass collective mental dream. And wake up out of that. Get yourself a good dose of yogic insomnia and stay ever awake like the Lord. And as Rabindranath Tagore sang, don't fall back asleep again. Awaken to the Lord knocking at your door. Let him in and don't fall back to sleep again, he sings. You know, the Nobel Prize winner here that was so centered in this teachings of the rishis. I think in the time remaining, and I say as we can come back to this chart, we can put it into 5 other ways that's related in the Annapurna Upanishad. So, you know, basically Vedanta equals Upanishad. Veda, Anta, Veda, or the Vedas, there are 4 of them. Inside of the 4 Vedas, there are 108 Upanishads divided into those 4 sections. And Upanishad, you know, is the guru, upa, that dissolves the knot, nisat, of ignorance in you. So when you come to the Upanishads, the knot of ignorance is, as just said here, this idea that creation is real, and that the soul has been created in the first place, or that the world exists separate from God. It only exists in the mind, we just said that, and it only appears in the mind, and then nothing outside of the mind will ever appear to you. It's all being projected by this mind. So we could put it in the way the Upanishad puts it. because Gaudapada, of course, when he studied the Mundaka Upanishad, the Mandukya Upanishad, he came up with all these beautiful teachings that are in his commentary. A lot of these are drawn from his commentary. So let's look at the way Nidaga put it to his son. Because fathers and sons back then were really powerful relationships. These were souls that had been with each other, interconnected like that kami creeper, that you pull. It's like whole families of rishis were on board in the 4 Vedas, and the way that each Veda had its own line of thinking about non-duality, and the teachings that came out of it, which were qualified non-duality, they each had their own style. So when you look back on them, it's really not looking back or forwards. It's looking into the eternal moment that they spent their time in. Timeless place, birthless, deathless, we've said all that, but timeless also. So when Nidaga concentrated for decades on the goddess, then he had a powerful realization. I'll just read you part of this. Lodged in Om, enveloping the root of all phenomena, and supporting the Bijam, I'm, who is also the independent Hrim, eternally blissful, with streaming tresses, the divine Annapurna who fulfills humanity. I propitiated her with the incantation of 27 syllables cultivated by countless female ascetics. That shows you a reference to these rishis were also female in gender and came up with all these powerful teachings. So when she appeared to him in his meditation, this beautiful goddess of the Upanishads, and he was amazed and humbled and worshipped. But the great thing that happened to him was after she left, because all she said was, "What do you want?" It's like knocking on the door of some god or something, opening the door and said, "What do you want?" Closed. Tell me what you want, straight to the point. And then he spoke out what he wanted, and she disappeared right away. And what he wanted, what he was left behind with, were these non-dual pillars that she gave him that removed the rest of his doubts so that he could become an illumined soul, and later on he could pass it on to Ribu, his son, and tell Ribu, use this mantra of Annapurna of 27 syllables and chant this for the rest of your life like I did. She'll come to you too, and your doubts will be removed. So when the Mother of Wisdom appears to us after devout worship and absolute faith in her, then her appearance itself is the remover of ignorance. It's not like you got your ignorance removed first and then she appeared. That's just on the level of things that were always unworthy of contemplating or brooding on. When you finally cleared your mind, there she was. Didn't we just say that, basically? It said that non-duality is a matter of immediate moment, immediacy, immanence. It's immanent in everything. And that's how they feel when they receive this experience of non-duality. So these 5 things we can end our class with right now that kind of summate all of this from the standpoint of a soul that's awakened from the last vestiges of ignorance. The first is, and this is her declaration to him, the first one of these delusions that people hold in their minds is that Brahman and Jiva are two. So she strikes at the root of this sense of separation, which the ego is foisting on us. God and Jiva are two different things. That's, of course, duality, as we just said. Creation proceeds from that duality in all of its flow. variances that go on in it. So that's the first delusion that she brings up to his mind. In other words, she would say, this is a delusion to think that you're separate from Brahman, that the jiva, that the Paramatman and the Jivatman are two different things. So find that line drawn on the water and watch it dissolve. Or if you put a stick over the water and it turned into two pools, that's going to be a long time for that stick floats away or gets taken away. But watch that line of demarcation that you think is real, that you're separate from God, long enough so that it dissolves and you just see one undivided ocean of pure conscious awareness, which is full of bliss, full of existence, and full of equanimity. And then you have arrived at the death of the first great delusion that was foisted upon us by the mind and Maya at the very outset, a beginningless beginning of incarnations that the soul decided to take. The second is a delusion that causes the misconception that the sense of agency dwelling in the self is real. So she's striking away at everything that seems to be real to us. As I said in one of my God blogs last week, this ego is precious to everyone. Nobody would think of doing away with it. They want that, you see, because it goes away like in deep sleep, game over, you see. So they want the game to go on, so that the ego is a great trickster and a great player of games. So if you can hold on to that ego and give it what it wants, then that's called life. And so what she's telling Nidaga here is that you've meditated on me for all this time because you want your delusion to go away. So here's the 5 forms of delusion that are still traces of in people like yourself. Do away with them. So first would be that you're separate from divine reality when you are that thou art. And the second would be that sense of agency in you is real. You're thinking, you're putting the ego in place of the Atman. The Atman got kicked on the throne, usurped the throne. The ego usurped the throne from the sovereignty of the Atman. The third delusion consists of thinking that the jiva associated with the 3 bodies has any real attachment. Avadhut also sings about this in one of his forthcoming verses. Really, you have no attachment whatsoever, he tells us. You are free of attachment all the time. So it's hard to say that to a person who not only is attached, but knows he's attached, and third, prefers to be attached than non-attached. So she's attacking the citadel of 3 different levels of problem with the human ego. 4 if you count the sense of agency. She's also speaking wisdom when she speaks 3 bodies, because just like waking, dreaming, and deep sleep are threefold, you have 3 bodies that go with them. The waking body here in this room, dreaming body tonight, deep sleep body, which is formless. So these 3 bodies with their 3 worlds, their 3 realms, all projected by the mind, vibrating mind, have to be withdrawn from. See? Like backing out of a room where you see a tiger. See? You open the door, it's a cage, you open the cage. You slowly back out, lock the door and walk away. So that's what it's going to take to free yourself of these 3 delusions. The fourth delusion concerns the falsehood that the immutable Brahman goes through changes. Well, good thing about 10 minutes ago, I mentioned a parinama, right? Because parinama is change. And its hub is nature, basically. I mean, nature has come out of the mind, so the problem is with the mind is that when it begins to project, it doesn't care. It likes to see changes. So every lower kind of knowledge in the world today is based on liking to see change. Chemistry, politics, I mean, you name it. If change doesn't happen, it would be boring. So the change that scientists are looking at, that psychologists are looking at in the mind, and that politicians and businessmen are looking at in the realm of money and power, all the way down to what the children are learning in school is based upon the reality of change. And no one stops to think for an instant that there's a foundation under that that's unchanging, and that's who I am. What to speak of now that I've seen that's who I am, that's what I want. Only Nidaga wants that, see? And when Ribu, his son, sees that in him, can I have that too? You meditate for decades on her like I did using this mantra, and your delusion will go away. And then she'll come and strike off the 5 roots of delusion in you. The 5th one being the delusion that falsely attributes reality to the world as separate from Brahman. So this is closer to the heart of the matter that Avadhut's trying to say here. His kind, if you want to call it a kind or style of non-duality, is that the world is real too, ultimately. So you're going to have to see through its unchanging nature to be able to, and see beyond the projections of it by the mind, to know it as unoriginated. What to say, that's where we come up with this word. The world can only be seen as real if it's seen as being unoriginated. If it's seen as created or destroyed, then it's not going to work. And all these teachings of changefulness and in nature and so forth, all these past 4 delusions are leading you up to this final crutch being knocked out from under you. See? So you have nowhere then to fall except in your absolute acceptance of non-origination, ajati. You become a follower of ajati vada. And it deals with everything that the advanced thinker is brooding about: time, space, karma, compassion. You name it. From the non-dual standpoint, when that truth is seen, then all of these things, along with the world too, show up their true nature as being one with Brahman. They never had a beginning, middle, and end. It's like sweetness in sugarcane juice, Ramakrishna said. So he tells his son, with self-realization in the mind, flashes the cessation of the 5 delusions. So this is why, as I was saying, Dattatreya telling his great student Sankriti, then Nidaga here is telling Ribu pretty much the same thing, is that keep this self-realization always close to you, court these wisdom teachings, until such a place when these lines of demarcation will dissolve completely, self-realization will flash in your mind, and you'll see the death of these 5 main delusions. All separations or lines of demarcation will disappear, and now you're wandering around as a Jivan Mukta, a living liberated soul. Jananim Sharadam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padopadme Toye Shritva Pranamami Mahur Mahur. Om Brahmanandam Shivam Shantam Premarupam Niranjidam Yogi Shamadbhutam Nityam Akandadvaita Lakshinam Vijnanam Trigunatitam Turya Beta Samgitam Subodham Sharadam Chaivam Vivakashashi Bhushanam. Samanvaya Mahacharya Yugadharma Swarupinam Sarvadeva Swarupam Shri Ramakrishna Namamyaham. O Ramakrishna, teacher of all, Sharda, goddess divine, in bosom holding those lotus feet, salutations to both ever be of mine. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat.